This photograph was taken by a famous or possibly infamous spirit photographer in 1872. The man's name was William Mumler, and he and his wife were spiritualists. His wife was a medium. She conducted seances to reach to the other side, and he took photographs that purported to show spirits behind, usually, his live subjects. And so Mary Lincoln, in 1872, about a year after her youngest son Tad died, went on sort of a pilgrimage to various spiritualist resorts and spas in the New England area. Ended up in Boston, and in Boston she went to visit William Mumler, the famous spirit photographer. She went veiled, heavily veiled, supposedly incognito. Supposedly, as he tells it, he did not know who she was. And she didn't take her veil off till he was behind the camera. Again, this is his telling. And he took the picture, and then 3 days later, she came back to pick up her print, and lo and behold, there was Abraham Lincoln standing behind her. He's got his hands on her shoulders, and he's watching over her. And she said later that during one of her seances, just before she went to Boston, she had felt his presence standing behind her with his hands on her shoulders. So she was quite pleased with this print. He made the front page of Harper's Weekly, along with his wife, who was a medium, and some of his engravings based on some of his spirit photos. He started out in Boston as a spirit photographer, where he was quite successful, and based on that success, he decided he could make more money, or do more good, depending on how you want to look at it, in New York City. So he went to New York and set up business there, where he did very well until a journalist noted that some of the spirits in his photographs were in fact walking the streets of New York, very much alive, very much three-dimensional. And as a result, Mumler was arrested, and he was tried for fraud, or defrauding the public, because of course people were paying for these pictures. He was, however, acquitted because the prosecution could not prove how he made these pictures. Photography was still a relatively new thing, and nobody could say how he did it. So he was acquitted. After that, he went back to Boston and started his business again, and it's then in Boston that Mary had this picture taken. He destroyed all his glass negatives before he died, so nobody knows. In the 1860s and 70s especially, when so many people had lost loved ones during the Civil War, it became an idea or a doctrine of considerable interest to a lot of people. And there were lots of spiritualists in Washington, D.C. Mary became very interested after the death of her second youngest son, Willie, who died in the White House when he was 11. There were seances held in the White House, and the idea was that you could maintain contact with people who had died, with your loved ones. She found it comforting after Willie's death. She found it comforting after Abraham Lincoln's death. And then when Tad died in 1871, she found it and this photograph comforting again. Her son, Robert, was no spiritualist, and he found her interest, frankly, embarrassing. He found a lot of things about her embarrassing. And as she became, I hate to say it, stranger, in the mid-1870s, she did begin to hear voices. She claimed that there was someone pulling wires out of her head. She was having some kind of breakdown. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And Robert attributed it, at least partially, to her interest in spiritualism. It was never brought up at her lunacy trial. She was tried for lunacy, found to be a lunatic, and sent to Bellevue Sanitarium in May of '75. She was released in September of that same year. And the trial transcripts, and Robert never actually said spiritualism was a factor in her fears for her, but it clearly was. This is actually the last photograph ever taken of Mary Lincoln. It was taken in 1872. She died in Springfield, in her room, at her sister Elizabeth's house in 1882. But this, as I said, is the last photograph taken of her, so it was taken 10 years before her death.